recording. So thank you for joining us. This afternoon session, we will be around 50 minutes. So we will finish somewhere between 10 to and 5 to the hour, which hopefully gives you, a 5 or 10 minute window to get prepared for your next meeting, because I'm sure you've all got something teed up for 2 o'clock. But hopefully I'm going to give you a breathing space between when this finishes and when that next meeting starts. I have got some slides because it just helps me with structure and make sure that I cover the key messages that I'd like for you to hopefully get some value from today. But we'll manage this workshop in 3 kind of thirds. So the first third, I'll just share some objectives, share some ideas. The second third, then I'll open up some breakout rooms and give you a chance to discuss what we've talked about in that first 15 minutes or so with the other people on the call. And hopefully it's a really good opportunity to get to meet some other people in your business network, get some ideas, share some learning, and get some new perspectives. And then the final third is just regrouping as a full session, and we'll just take some themes and some feedback from people from your groups. So thinking about, okay, it's all very well thinking about the principles of what we talk about today, but what actions will be taken and how will we make a positive impact using those actions in our businesses? So that's the idea of today's session. So hopefully a real working session, opportunity to process what you're thinking. Okay, so let me start by sharing my screen so that you can see what I can see. Hold on a sec, here we go. And we've just got a couple of other people joining us, so I'll just let them in the room as well. So today's all about thinking about how do we become more emotionally intelligent leaders, okay, in our businesses. How do we become more emotionally intelligent? And the whole idea of these sessions that we run these, aim to run these weekly. Most weeks we run them. There'll be the odd occasion where I can't run them, but otherwise it's weekly workshops. And the leadership workshops, the idea is to give you some thinking space. So time to kind of step off the treadmill, slow things down, and really start to think about what you're doing. Because what we find is, new ideas and innovation tends to only happen when we slow things down a bit. So these are an opportunity for us to slow things down and get some new kind of fresh perspectives. But today's workshop, as I say, is about how do we develop and become more emotionally intelligent as leaders. And we'll look at emotional intelligence, what it is and why it's important. Then we'll look at the impact of it, and then we'll talk about kind of stimulus and response and what that means for us and how we can start to develop a bit more space for leadership. And then we'll give you an opportunity to talk with each other about, okay, so how do we develop this? Where are we going to focus? And then we'll feed back from the group to the wider group as well. So just a quick starting point, just to think about today's workshop. I'd love to hear it in the chat. So I'm sure you all know where the chat box is. Let me just get you started in the chat. If you think about emotional intelligence, some of you will have perhaps more experience of it and knowledge of it than others. I'd love to hear what are you thinking? What would you like to get from this workshop related to emotional intelligence? So just in the chat, just a quick, single one-liner about what you're looking to get from this workshop on emotional intelligence. And that's really going to help. Just help us direct your focus. And what I'll do is, as I see your messages, I'll just have those in mind as we go through the model so we can give context to the topic we talk about this afternoon. So just a moment of reflection in advance of us coming in. While you're doing that, I'll also say hi to Laura and hi to Rachel, who joined us just after we started. So thank you for joining us, Laura. Thank you for joining us, Rachel. And I'm sure you heard me say Laura and Rachel, but if not, we'll do this workshop in thirds. So the first 15 minutes or so is about some context and some principles. The next part will be then a breakout discussion with other leaders on the call. And then the final third will be us sharing back what we've learned and what key takeaways we've got. Thanks, Heidi. That's great. So Heidi says self-awareness. So starting to think about self-awareness. Thanks, Heidi. Your own self-awareness when it comes to emotional intelligence. Great, thank you. Sarah says revisit emotional intelligence, in particular in relation to sales. Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah. And that's useful from a leader's perspective, but as you say, also even as sales leaders, you'll very often find yourself in customer interaction. So how do we manage that in relation to customers as well? Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. Joe, thank you, Joe. how I can be considered conscious. How it can be. Oh, sorry. Let me start again. How EI can be considered consciously and applied in the workplace. Thank you, Joe. That's great. I will attempt to give you some pointers on that. Thank you. Reader, thanks, Reader. I do this regularly, but I wanted to see if there are any new styles. Okay, thanks, Reader. Yeah, we'll see if we can give you a new perspective on it today, and certainly, hopefully, in the discussions, you'll get that from your colleagues. Eric, thanks, Eric. Does EI change over time? Very good. Thanks. We can certainly discuss that. In other words, is it different today than 10 years ago? Great question, Eric. Thank you. We'll look to address that as we go through it. Rachel, anxious staff who struggle with tasks, how to manage that situation and not make them feel worse. Yeah, very, very good, because sometimes as leaders, if we're trying to support people and we try and put potentially a bit of positive pressure on them, it could go the other way. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Rachel. That's really useful. Laura, hi, thanks for letting me in. I would like some ideas about diplomacy and to encourage staff to be motivated. Great, thank you, Laura. We'll see if we can work on that as well today. So these ideas that you've got, the objectives you've got for the session, also take these into your discussions with your breakout groups when we get to that in about 10, 15 minutes or so. Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. That's great to have that kind of focus for today's session. So I'm going to introduce you to a couple of models today. The first model I'm going to introduce you to is this model called the coach model. And if you've been on these sessions before, you will have seen this model. But just if you have seen it before, take an opportunity to look at it through kind of fresh eyes, beginner's mind, as it were. If you haven't seen the model, hopefully it's useful as a kind of framework for leadership. So this is a framework for coaching as a leadership style. And when we look at emotional intelligence, one of the key frameworks for leadership intelligence, one of the key frameworks and kind of underlying styles is coaching. So coaching is a great enabler for emotional intelligence, and you'll start to see that as we go through today's session. But this model is from the book Coaching Leaders, and really it kind of lays out a roadmap for coaching as a leadership style. And we think about, in the first instance, having a plan, making sure that as leaders in our business, we're clear on what is the plan we are working on. So what are the strategic imperatives? What are the key actions that deliver on that strategy? And how do we make sure we've got alignment with our teams and our own plans? And then we start to think about the model. So the model kind of starts with trust and relationships. It's really difficult. If you've tried coaching somebody, and you haven't got a good relationship with them, it's really, really difficult because you meet defensiveness or resistance. So that relationship has to be in place in the first instance because it becomes the gateway to coaching. And once that relationship's in place, and there might be things we have to do differently with different people and adapt our approach to cultivate that relationship. Once that relationship's in place, then it's about making sure that we've got a really strong contract and agreement in place with each member of our team. And the contract really is a commitment between us and them to how we'll work together. Strategic commitment. That's really important because that's very often the piece that's overlooked in leadership models. But that upfront commitment to this is what I'll commit to you as a leader. This is the expectation we can have of each other from a leader and a team member perspective. Really, really important to get that agreed up front. And once that contract's in place, then we can start to talk about objectives, goals, expectations. What does it take for somebody to perform at the highest level? And that is an agreement between us and that person. And it's a process of conversation and documentation. And once the objectives and goals are clear, then we start to think about creating space for action and observation. So allowing our teams to do great work, do what they do best, and creating some space as a leader to observe them in practice. And from there, you see, we then have the opportunity to start to spot the things they can't spot for themselves, and that creates opportunities to coach for change. So the model really is this kind of roadmap that brings us around to coaching. And then, of course, when we think about coaching, we think about the coaching styles, questioning, listening, the different models that are available. But we're coaching really to help people to change and improve to become the best versions of themselves. And then the final part of our model, and you'll see it's a mnemonic, so COACH, which spells out obviously coach. The final step in the model is the H, which is heroes in the making. This is about helping people to start to think bigger for themselves, start to see where they fit in the organization and how they can start to make a really high contribution to not just their own functional role, but to start to think about where they contribute across the business towards, not only their success, but the success of the team, the success of you as a leader, and you collectively as a business. So it's a really nice model that helps us to start to think about applying and adopting a true coaching leadership style, not just coaching interventions, but coaching as a way of working with our teams to achieve goals. So that's our coach model. But then if we think about where emotional intelligence fits within that, emotional intelligence is very much about the approach that we take. And I don't know if any of you have seen the emotional intelligence model, but there is a guy called Daniel Goleman, and I guess this speaks to Eric's point about how the model has changed, because Daniel Goleman and his research team were the people that kind of coined the term emotional intelligence. Before the work that they had done, the research work they'd done, the term emotional intelligence didn't really have a place, in modern business leadership and management. People had talked about intellectual quotient, emotional quotient, but they really framed the model emotional intelligence. And what they talked about was this blend between intellect and connection emotionally with people and managing ourselves as emotional beings. Because, of course, very often in business workplaces, we think about employees, team members, but of course, we're all people, they're all people, and we all have emotions to manage. So the emotional intelligence model actually started out as 4 frameworks and then progressed to 5. And let's just talk through them because it will be useful. So the first kind of cornerstone, if you like, of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. And Heidi mentioned that in her comment earlier about creating greater self-awareness. Self-awareness is the first step. And some of you might have heard me talk about this before, but I remember, my last big corporate role, I worked for a business director, the country business leader for our healthcare business. And he was a guy that was really passionate, really fired up, but he was also very aggressive. And he had this approach where something would happen, he would just flip. And you never knew which mood he would come into, a meeting or into a review or into any session that we were having as a leadership team. And he would quite openly say, yes, sometimes I fly off the handle, sometimes I can be really aggressive. I know. And in fact, excuse my French, he used to say, I know I can be a bit of an arsehole. But that's not good enough, right? Because that's the first step in emotional intelligence. Just being aware that you do something is not enough. That's not being emotionally intelligent. You are one step on the model. The second step on the model is to go from self-awareness to self-management. So you might be aware that certain situations trigger you or cause an emotional response or cause you to feel a certain way. But actually, as you develop emotional intelligence, you need to move from awareness to management. So how do I start to preempt some of those situations and preempt my response rather than reacting? And that really is the second element. So we become aware of what we're doing, how different situations, how different interactions, different people make us feel. And then we start to manage ourselves in those situations so we don't always react in a way that perhaps is often not the way we want to react, and certainly not the way that gets the best from our teams and our businesses. So self-awareness and self-management are the first 2 steps. Then the third step is social or relationship awareness. So this is about starting to become aware of what's happening with other people. So when we're in the presence of our teams, maybe of our colleagues, of our peers, even our own managers, to start to be aware of what's happening, how are they thinking and feeling, how do they react under certain situations or under pressure, and then how do we tune into that so that we recognize what then needs to happen once we see that pressure applied or the response to the pressure. And then the fourth element, once we're aware of what's happening with our team members and people around us, then it's about how do we manage that. So social or relationship awareness, and then social or relationship management. So learning to empathize with people, ask questions, perhaps create some space when needed, perhaps apply a little bit of positive pressure when it's needed to people, but understanding what's going on for that person, what's the best way to react and respond to them so that we get the best from them in any situation. Sometimes it might be a bit of encouragement, but we only know to do that if we've understood it and recognized it, and then been able to manage the way in which we interact with that person. And so they're the four cornerstones. They were the four original cornerstones. And more recently, over the last probably 2 or 3 years, Daniel Goleman and his team updated the model to add a fifth element to emotional intelligence, and that fifth element is motivation. So what they noticed was that over time, in businesses, leaders, teams, if you're doing the same thing over and over, you can start to lose motivation. And actually, a big part of emotional intelligence is recognizing when does motivation need revisiting? When do we have to retune either ourselves or our teams back into what really matters? Thinking about purpose, thinking about intrinsic motivation, and how we start to manage that for ourselves and the organization that we work with. And as we think about these 5 elements, actually, very much they support each other. So as we work through this, it becomes a cycle of kind of awareness management for ourselves, for our teams, and then motivation. And then I just want to share one other model with you, and then we'll go into some discussion about this in some breakout groups. But I talked in the beginning about stimulus and response. I don't know if you've seen this quote from Viktor Frankl: between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to change or choose our response. And in our responses lies the growth and freedom for ourselves. And when we think about this in the context of emotional intelligence, it really is about how do we start to become more proactive and conscious of the responses that we have with our team members and in different situations. And sometimes we'll find, when, especially in leadership, we're managing teams or we're managing groups, and something negative, we might notice that someone says or does something negative, defensive, or disruptive, and we might have to notice what happens to ourselves as we experience that response from our teams. There's all sorts of things goes on. We go for, sometimes it can prompt anger, sometimes it can prompt frustration, sometimes we kind of almost feel like we need to give up. It can really kind of start to affect us. And I had many times when I was leading different types of businesses, and when you manage different people, sometimes managing businesses is quite straightforward. It's always when we come to manage and interact with people that we're going to meet our challenges, and managing ourselves is the most important part of that. I just want to share a really simple kind of emotional self-control model, which kind of speaks to this Viktor Frankl model from some of you may have read the book Man's Search for Meaning. If you have read Man's Search for Meaning, you'll know within that it's an incredible book. Actually, it's written by Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, and it was his observations of living through that and recognizing why some people made it and some people didn't, even though the circumstances were the same. But he starts to think about this gap between stimulus and response. And if you think about 2 sequences, what happens for most people is that events happen, things happen all the time in our business, and we tend to react. So an event happens, there's a reaction either from you or from your teams, and then there's an outcome. And sometimes that outcome's the right outcome, sometimes that outcome's the wrong outcome, i.e., someone receives a complaint from a customer, or some kind of negative email or communication, and if they respond too quickly and emotionally, then actually what they might do is send something they regret later. But once you've sent something, you can't unsend it. So then there's an outcome that happens as a consequence of that. And what we need to think about is how we switch that second and third step. So what it then looks like is that an event happens, we pause and think to ourselves, actually, this has happened, I've received this communication, or this person's talking to me in this way. What outcome do I want as a result of this next conversation? And by pausing and thinking of the outcome we want, it completely changes the way that we respond rather than react. So instead of an event happening, us reacting and there being an outcome, events happen, we take a moment, we pause, reflect, think, what outcome do I want instead? And then we respond much more in control and much more eloquently, and in a way that serves us, serves our teams, our businesses, and in certain situations, our customers as well. So I want you to kind of think about that. So instead of kind of the response is thinking, okay, what outcome do I want? Actually, what do I need to do now? Do I need to perhaps be a bit more curious about where this is going and how we get to that outcome? And then finally, of course, think about empathy within the model. Empathy depends not only on one's ability to identify someone else's emotions, so what someone else is feeling, but also the capacity to put ourselves in their shoes and to experience the appropriate emotional response. So thinking about that emotional intelligence model. So we've got a couple of things going on here. So emotional intelligence, the 5 kind of key elements of it. Then we've got emotional self-control, and of course where that fits in the broader model of coaching as a leader. So I'm going to open up some breakout rooms now. We'll have 15 minutes in the breakout rooms just to share some ideas, just discuss where are you with this, what are the kind of key areas of emotional intelligence that you'd like to focus on. And as I was going through some of that content, there might have been some kind of insights that you were thinking, yeah, actually, I could use that, or I could work on that. So discuss that with your colleagues, and I'm just going to open up some. So I've just randomized breakout rooms. We'll do 3 rooms, which I think is going to give us a couple of 3s and a 4. So I hope you enjoy your conversation. 15 minutes. And if you can just decide on someone who will feed back at the end of that as well. We'll just take some feedback at the end, and then we'll close, as I say, somewhere between 10 to and 5 to 2. So I'll open up the rooms, click the button, and I look forward to seeing you back here in about 15 minutes. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoy the conversations.
Take care.
Okay, so we'll regroup. Thanks, everybody, for those. I hope you enjoyed your conversations in your breakout rooms. We will just take some quick feedback, if that's all right, from each group. I don't know if you managed to get to talking about who might feedback, but now's as good a time to do that as any. So should we start with, we'll start with group 1, which was Eric, Heidi, and Rachel. Did you discuss who might give some feedback?
No, we didn't, actually. But Eric, you were pretty good. Where's Eric?
Oh, let's discuss briefly what we discussed, because we discussed a couple of things, and I don't want to over summarize. So please chip in, Heidi or Rachel, of course. But I think we started out by saying that probably the ball starts rolling with self-awareness in this case. So understanding how you woke up that day, and be open that people wake up every day in certain circumstances in terms of personal life stress or work stress, or in a positive way, of course, that is true. And then we sort of said it's the old saying, count to 10 before you do something or you say something that later you might regret. So we had a bit of discussion around that. And then I think what was very interesting, we started to say, is it different today than it was before? And I think we said that probably the basics are very similar, but because people and culture and the environment is changing, and Heidi was saying people are now more open, they share their feelings and their thoughts more maybe than before. And then we asked the question, is it today more different than it was before? Because people are being more open and that's sharing their feelings. So we were kind of discussing that. And I think we said it's probably slightly more difficult today, potentially, than it was before. And then we touched upon a point that there seems to be, but I don't want to say too black and white, that some more dissatisfaction and disengagement in the group. And it's also, if you generally speak, look at the research out there, so many people want to change jobs. There's some dissatisfaction there, and probably it's the story of the grass greener at the neighbor's garden and your own garden. So we were talking a little bit that, and then suddenly we were disconnected. Is that a fair summary, Heidi or Rachel?
I'd say that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Eric. So actually the change in the culture in organizations where people are more open to talking about, emotions and what's happening for them, what they're experiencing. And sometimes that's a positive thing. Sometimes that can actually be make things more difficult, right?
I think it's a positive thing that ultimately, the culture is there to be open, to be transparent. But on the other side of things, I think sometimes the resilience now isn't there.
Okay, so tell me a bit more about that, Heidi. The resilience, what in teams isn't there?
Yeah, I think, to accept that, okay, we have busy periods, we have a lot on as a team, we'll get through it. And we take that on versus maybe some of the quieter periods and things. But the moment somebody feels a little bit overworked, or if there's a little bit of additional pressure applied because we're in a sales organisation, the resilience isn't there. And the ability to sort of go, okay, what do I need to do in order to achieve the tasks to achieve? And what do I not need to do? It's very much a help. I'm overworked. I'm stressed. Time management. They've almost got a lower resilience to go. Actually, it's a busy time. We're clear on our goals. We're clear on where we need to be. We're supported by the whole team. It's not all on one person's shoulders. Let's get sort of dig deep and get on with it.
Yeah.
It almost seems to be that panic's there now, going, help me. I'm stressed.
And if you've got a team that do that, you can't be that for everybody. You have to be really careful that it doesn't then start to impact your own productivity and effectiveness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that you take on too much in terms of the, I would say it like the babysitting, which they have to. Okay, well, what is your plan? What are you thinking? You really then have to coach to really help them put their plans in place and steer where needed, I suppose.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Heidi. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Eric. Okay, so let's go to group two. Group two was Joe, Laura, and Nigel. What did you decide who would feedback? Laura, Joe, Nigel?
I know we didn't talk about that, and probably we will kind of have our own little kind of bits of discussion, I suppose. So maybe we can kind of contribute to it. What I found quite interesting was actually people's our group's kind of personal experiences. So we all probably have a very similar experience whereby we're coping with different people with different needs at different times. There are actions that perhaps we immediately could take. I think we're all quite good at perhaps reflecting on our responses. I think it was very interesting that Joe kind of spoke a little bit about how you can draw back a little bit, that obviously, responding in a certain way will change the outcome of the situation. And perhaps, I need to think a little bit about that initial interaction, but something that I found personally is actually quickly trying to assess people's needs. What is that other person's need? It's not something that comes naturally to me to do in this situation, is trying to identify the needs, because from that, perhaps I'm a little bit more responsive and I can deal with it in a way, whereas I'm perhaps normally a little bit too emotional. So I found that interesting. Pass over to Nigel just to talk a little bit.
Thanks, Laura. That's really good. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so really thinking about the other person and building that empathy really and that sounds simple, but it's not simple in really high pressure moments or in difficult conversations, or when someone perhaps blindsides you with something you weren't expecting. Actually, it's really difficult to then be empathetic in that situation. You have to have a lot of kind of emotional regulation to be able to do that. Yeah, it's good. Nigel.
Yeah, everything Laura said and Joe said, I think we could all relate back to sort of family issues. I mean, having a load of kids always helps you, I think, in sales, because you have to emotionally detach yourself from anything you do with them.
Yeah.
If they're in trouble, and take your time. I've been accused of I don't do enough at home by my wife, and I should have said this, I should have done that, and I think we've probably all been in that situation. but I spend more time, probably have more time, as I was saying, with my daughter. I take her to school, I pick her up. So I've got my opportunity to have my say when actually things have calmed down. And you can relate that to your workplace. If you're a leader of a sales team or whatever, there's always somebody willing to have a pop at you. There's always somebody scheming to get one over on you. And I think, you bide your time, don't you? You don't fly off the handle, because that's what they want you to do. So you store it up and sort it out at a later date, like adults should. That would be my.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. And but that's stuff that you learn through experience, right? Through, as you say, sometimes not handling things the right way. You do you might have thrown off the handle one time. Go, you know what, I've made that situation worse.
When we worked at Gun Supply together, how many years ago was that, Justin?
20, Nigel, at least.
At least. We had a lot of training on empathy, Jankart, PSS 2000 courses.
Yeah.
And it was a process, wasn't it, to get to the end of a goal, to get the goal. And I think, you don't particularly do it in the order that the PSS 2000 does it, but you do end up there eventually.
Yeah.
Sorry,
as long as you're aware you're following a process, whether that's the same every time, as long as you have a structure, a roadmap, you can get there. Yeah. Very good. Thanks, Nigel. Thank you, Heidi. Final group was actually Andrew, Reader, Nadine joined us through the discussion as well. So I know we didn't talk about who would feedback. Andrew, Reader, would you like to have a go at it? One of you or the other?
I think you should, Justin. You were like the state sponsor in this team.
I could do, but you've heard probably from me like 50-60% of today's session anyway. I would happily do it, but I think you or Reader would do it much more eloquently, Andrew.
Okay. So how to describe this? So there were lots of sort of situational, contextual moments about how we actually see ourselves in sort of the emotional intelligence scale. I always see myself really badly, and I think my self-awareness is really quite poor. It might be a mixture between a Scottish upbringing and having the emotional intelligence of a standardized rock. But there's something that Heidi said today is about resilience. I think that was really important that we didn't touch on. And I think like Heidi, possibly coming across an awful lot of people that aren't very resilient in the position that they're in. And maybe there's a little bit of scapegoating, or emotional intelligence is used as a way of getting out of what they're actually supposed to be doing at the time, because I'm quite simplistic and quite straightforward from beginning to end to achieve what we're supposed to do. So yeah, I just think it's one of these areas that's incredibly important, and I need to learn an awful lot more. So from moving from being a large emotionally intelligent rock to a smaller, slightly less emotionally intelligent.
Thanks, Andrew. I think you're right. It's interesting that you talk about resilience. I think it probably sits under that fifth element, which is the motivation. The motivation on an ongoing basis. How do you keep yourself motivated through difficult periods, through higher workloads, through more challenging situations? It's an area for development for leaders and for teams. Thanks, Andrew. Reader, anything you'd like to add before we kind of wrap up?
No, I think just a quick one to add is everyone. I mean, I think I said it in the meeting. Everyone's unique, so when you're communicating with different people, as well as what Nadeem said, each culture is going to be different. Each country is going to be different. Their emotional intelligence are going to be completely different to the British or the English way of doing things. So you've got to be able to adapt. Every staff member, every single person that you work with, you've got to find a way of sharing your intelligence on how to adapt to them and how to work and to understand their style of their own emotions. Some people don't know how to deal with emotions, and it's about how you deal with them and how to emotional state.
Yeah, thank you, Reader. And I think that goes to the heart of leadership and in sales, right? How do you really understand the other person through, leading teams, understand what motivates that person best and how to get the best out of them, And it's the same with customers, right? How do we understand what the customer really needs and serve them at the highest level possible so they continue to work with us and are really motivated to do so? Yeah, thank you, Rita. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions today. Really enjoyable discussion, an enjoyable session. This is, for me, emotional intelligence is a continuum, right? So it's something we continually work on, continually build. It's. I don't think there's anybody that's the perfect article. And if you look at Daniel Goleman's work, he would say the same. So final couple of things from me. If anybody's interested, we have this Coaching Leaders Scorecard. I'd love to invite you, if you haven't taken it already, I'll drop the link to it in the chat. This is a resource that we use to measure your coaching leadership kind of score. And it's a really good, it's a useful tool because once you've taken the assessments, 48 assessment statements, it takes about 10-15 minutes to work through. You'll get a score. It'll give you a development report that will give you some direction around what you can do to further develop your kind of leadership in the area of coaching. We also have this toolkit. So it's a toolkit full of documents and assets. If anybody would like a copy of that, let me know. I'll happily send that to you. It's got lots of different kind of tools that you can use as a leader that start to help you navigate that coaching approach to leadership. And a final couple of things. I'll talk about this regularly, but think about, what does it take to create leadership success? I'm a firm believer you need these 5 things. You need somewhere you can have confidential conversations where hopefully this creates a bit of a platform for that each week. You need a community of people that are going through the same things. You need people you can collaborate with so that you can share ideas and learn new things. You need some challenge to your perspective so that you don't just keep doing the same things over and over and expecting a different result. And you need some commitment. You need someone to help you with accountability to change. And we build those into each of our programs and workshops that we run. And then the final thing, so anybody would like a one-to-one, I always offer a one-to-one to this group. If you've turned up as a thank you, I'd love to offer you a 45-minute one-to-one coaching session on me. The link to that is in the chat as well. That'll just give you direct access to my diary. You probably won't get in there until next week now because I'm pretty round for the rest of this week. But really simple, kind of 3 steps. We talk about where are you now, where do you want to get to, what actions are going to get you there, and how might that help you and your organization. Okay, we are at 5:02. I want to stop now so that I can give you some time to prepare for your 2 o'clocks. Huge thanks to you all for joining us today. I am happy to stay on if anybody does have any questions or wants to talk to me one-to-one, but otherwise I'll just say thanks so much for your participation. Great workshop, really enjoyed today, and I look forward to seeing you at a future one. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
You all.
Cheers, take care. See you soon. Thanks, everyone. See you. Bye.